Hello and welcome to episode 2 of Let's Play Legend of Dragoon. Where I want to start this one episode with is, just looking at, kind of the historical place that it is in history. And, when this game came out, it was, the year 2000. Final Fantasy IX is also came out that year. It was, the turning point, PS2 was about to come out. It was kind of the end of the PS1's life cycle, and this game does, show, kind of those limitations with the in-game graphics of being what they are, with kind of the blockiness of the characters, and the inability to have too many polygons on the screen. But this okay, let's try this again. Hello and welcome to Let's Play Legend of Dragoon 2. This episode, let's, go ahead and look at, some of the historical context of when this game came out. It was the year 2000, it's a pre-9/11 world, for one thing. Clinton, was still in office. Al Gore versus George Bush was the, presidential election that year. I was a junior in high school. Final Fantasy IX was also coming out that year. It was 3 years after, Final Fantasy VII, changed video gaming. The PS1, was neck and neck with the N64 at this time. The Dreamcast, had come out, but at least in my corner of the world, it didn't really make that much of a splash. So, and, where this was after, the FF7 effect, was taking, root, which I'm going to talk about in its Let's Play. But, how that affects this game is, I was deep into JRPGs at that time. I had played Final Fantasy 7, 8, 5, 6, Chrono Trigger. At least I think I've played Chrono Trigger at this point. But, I also was playing some of the newer ones of Star Ocean 2 and Final Fantasy 9. Forgive me, after 15 years, it's hard to remember exactly which came first, this or Final Fantasy IX, which, one of the things that I keep being surprised about when I, read things about Legend of Dragoon online, is that they want to compare it a lot to Final Fantasy VII, which I don't really see. There's very little going on between this and that, in terms of, other than just being a JRPG game. This has a very different setting, it has very different villains, it has a very different art style. About the only, thing similar to an art style is both characters have kind of spiky hair, which was more of a function at the time. If you don't know this, about video games, why everybody had such spiky hair for a while there wasn't just, the 90s hairstyle. It had to do with rendering power of the games at that point, because hair is, composed of so many small strands. Each one of those, in a computer sense, is a separate particle, and having that many particles on the screen makes it very hard to calculate, render, and whatnot. And so if, you listen to, like, Brad Bird talk about it on the Incredibles commentary, or, things like, or watch a, Pixar, documentary, you can, see that. And so, how the video game industry, was struggling, with that, which, sometimes a simple solution is, the best solution, which is, just go ahead and have, a hairstyle that doesn't require a lot of movement. And so, that's kind of where the spiky-headed hero, trope came from, and, in my opinion, is fine. But I do see that apparently some people respond negatively to that. I don't get why, but it's a great big world out there. So, you know, looking at this game, it is both a product of its time, and yet I feel that it transcends it a bit more than other things that were coming out towards the end of the PS1 cycle. Tales of Destiny 2 or Tales of Eternia, depending on which translation you want to look at. Final Fantasy 9. I definitely put this above Final Fantasy 9. And in fact, that's why I get so confused when people want to compare it with 7. 9 is a direct comparison. Both are a fully 3D realized turn-based medieval JRPG. Both have trees of life that you have to climb at some point. Both run the full gambit of environments. Both are a little more lighthearted than Final Fantasy VII was, which was very dark in a lot of its ways. And so I personally see its rival as 9. you know they both came out in the same year, and so but that's just my opinion. And looking at it, honestly, this game is still beautiful in a lot of ways. Yeah, I know the characters, models haven't aged that well, but I mean, look at the prison. I mean, it has beautiful lighting. You know immediately what you're gonna get with this prison. You know that it's a bad place. You know that it is quite hellish and dark inside. You know that only an evil empire would build something like this. You understand more of the country because of the level design, which honestly is not something you see a lot of in more modern video games. Honestly, you can't tell the culture of Cocoon from really any of the environments that you run into on in Final Fantasy 13. A little bit of Grand Pulse, you can kind of tell that it does have a different culture, but just barely. And I'm trying to think of another JRPG of the PS3 era. You know, Star Ocean 4 is a good game. That does have some levels of that kind of game design, but this was made in a very different era when they would actually use, in my opinion, to a more effective way things like a world map that you can see that how you get how you get from the destroyed town to the prison is through a forest, but in such a way that it makes logical sense of this small obstacle and this kind of hidden tutorial level of showing how you need to get there, and give you a chance to navigate and show you that this triangle bar is not just pointing out your character like other video games. It shows you it gives you a warning as to what your random enemy encounter rate is going to be, which I know a lot of people don't like the random encounters with JRPG. I personally do like it. It's very simple. It's very easy and gets you into the gameplay, and so that's just a personal choice. And so I kind of like that in this game it does both in various stages. Like this prison stage, it's not a random encounter level. It is it does have on-screen touch enemies to engage battle mode, but it also does, have random encounters, in other parts of the world, which, is in its own way good. And, so I personally enjoy that. I do see, the difference of, tropes and why they want to invoke different things in different ways, and they use it sparingly but logically. And so, you know, in my opinion, it, makes a stronger game, for it. And so, just going around this prison, seeing the darkness, seeing that it's a dank place, even though, it is built into, a cliff face that, rises high, it still is, a very deep, dark dungeon, in the literal sense, that you have to, climb through. And, it really, especially this early in the game, it really sells, what kind of game you're getting into. You see that, while they have elevators, they're very simple mechanical, baskets, that get raised and lowered. You know, this, will contrast with later with, when you go to, one of the things I want to, go ahead and say right now is, I'm going to be, analyzing the game, and so there's going to be, plenty of spoilers in it. So if you're, offended by spoilers, or if you don't want them, I'm sorry, then this isn't going to be the Let's Play series for you, because I'm going to, fully be talking about it. Such as, this Lavitz fellow here, keep a close eye on him. He may not be super around forevers. But anyway, speaking of that, Lavitz is, in a lot of ways, a very unique character in video gaming. The closest other one that I could think of, which might actually explain why some people, want to compare this to Final Fantasy VII, is because the only other one like him, is really Aerith or Aerith, depending on what your current translation is her from that game, and I'll be pointing that out as we're going along. But I mean, he's just, his own person. He has a distinct personality. He's not just an archetype. He has foibles. He has, goals and ambitions. He has dreams. He has everything a fully realized character, would want, and is very human in a lot of ways. I mean, even just here in this opening, where he's trying his damnedest to get his fellow compatriots out of this hellish prison, and honestly, he fails. And he's not strong enough to break out of there alone. And so, what normally in a game would be, Dart getting in over his head and, the knight saving him, this early in the game, it's kind of refreshing to see it go the other way of, your hero, starts out and then has to, help, the other person. This isn't Tales of Symphonia where, Lloyd needs Kratos to save him early game. Instead it, goes the other way, which, is refreshing and also, sets both characters well. Because, most other games would make it, the easier, concept of, Lavitz, which would be, a wiser kind of, more mentor-y character to Dart, and, have it be, a much more simple relationship, as opposed to what they do here, which is they're much more, equals, which, explains, Dart's, actions later when he joins the war effort of, why they're willing to do that. Well, it's because, he is equal to one of the, head knights of the kingdom, in terms of battle. He has someone to vouch for him. He has, those things. He is of a military value, on his own, that he has learned, through all his travels, around the world, looking for, the black monster, which we'll find out a little bit more of, next episode. But because he has all that experience, all that, training, all that swordsmanship, we'll find out, other, companions that he traveled with, which is, Hansel, and, some of the places he's gone, such as Rogue down there in, the deep south of this game world, that, he has, seen it all, while it doesn't, directly, come out, as easily, at the same time, he's not, a total noob and has to, learn everything, which, is just fine for a character arc, but that isn't the one we're on here. And so, for that reason, I'm kind of refreshed, because it isn't just the same thing that we see, all the time. He isn't just, Lloyd again, which is ironic that I keep mentioning that name. Tales of Symphonia, is, one of the other things I'm playing, and, that game, is beautiful in its own way, and, because it starts off so, simplistically, and seems like such a cliche storm, but then they, take it, and then they take it to another level, and make it, complex, in its ways, beyond that, which is, a beautiful way of, constructing a game. Of, you get all the information you need, you think you're understanding it, you are making, these emotional connections, and then, doing something with it, as opposed to just relying on the tropes or the cliches of, the genre, which, it does it great in that game, and honestly, it does it good, it does it great in this game, of, while it does start off, with, a damsel in distress, it then builds on it. It lets you introduce, more people, in the prison that you're saving, and honestly, that you can't save, because these are not, perfect superhuman, gods. They are human beings. Lavitz, can't save all the other knights that have been captured in the early part of this war. And, while he doesn't dwell on, that grief, excuse me, while he doesn't dwell on that grief and that pain, as much as other games might, it does, affect him. It does, he does have to, deal with that, and, we'll see when we come back to this area that, yeah, that, that does matter, that does affect him, that does have a resonance, and the fact that it's not, the fact that this game does so many things subtly, as opposed to blunt and in your face, I could understand, why, if you're not really looking out for it, it's going to pass you by. One of the things that, has bothered me the past, dozen years of video gaming is people not understanding the laughing scene in Final Fantasy X. To me, it's fairly simple what they're doing, but everyone else just goes, "Why is the voice acting bad?" And they don't understand that it's supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be annoying and troublesome and irksome and hurt your ears a little bit, and, it's not supposed to sound natural in that particular moment. No one, I don't want to, say video gamers are stupid, but so many of them don't understand that, the underpinnings of that scene is, working out frustration and depression, and how you keep moving emotionally, even though, so much, even though you have so much weighing you down, which is the whole point of that scene, which is, tells you so much about Yuna's character going through it of, you know, yeah, she does kind of lie to herself. She does put on a fake, smile, a fake aura of happiness when really what could be underneath it is something much darker, much more troubling, much different. And so because of, because of that, a lot of people, don't, in my opinion, really understand it, going through the game the first time, and instead, that kind of gets us to, Final Fantasy 13, which is they try to, simplify and dumb it down, and now the game sucks. Whereas, this, Final Fantasy 10, this game, do a lot more, subtler storytelling where, you have to be a more active reader, you have to, think about it yourself, and it doesn't just, give you, all the immediate answers, on a plate. Which to me, is fantastic, but I understand, that not everybody, wants that in, an experience. I have, a friend, and, when I was, kind of putting off reading, The Fault in Our Stars, because I knew it was going to be depressing, in a lot of ways. I mean, that's a book about, teenage kids with cancer, and and at least a few of them are going to die. That's because, that while it is, transcendent and beautiful and, does a lot of great things, because it has that emotional baggage, going into it, that, a lot of people are not always in the mood for that. And, I was talking to a friend about it, and he's like, well, why aren't you, ready to, have your mind blown and, be set to, depressing and blah, blah, blah. And, and I didn't want to, yell this at him angrily, but, a lot of, most people, myself included, don't want our heads constantly exploded. We don't want, the earth constantly changed. Sometimes, yeah, we need it. Sometimes, oftentimes we want it. But not all the time, every day, with every experience. So, that's why you'll see a lot of things like, the current superhero movie craze that we're in, where you know what it is that you're getting into. Wolverine is gonna, show up, and, he's gonna wear some tight black leather. He's gonna have, his claws be all sharp. He's gonna, stab robots in the, face with his claws, and, he's gonna have, trials, tribulations, rising action, a climax, and then, things are gonna, kind of settle back down, and, so you know that going in, and you know what to expect, you know what to kind of gear yourself towards, which is what the whole idea of genre is, and so, you know, which is, I know I'm getting a little rambling off track, but, that's what this is. It the film term would be a genre picture, but, I don't know if that would be an applicable term, here in gaming, if that would, be an usable term, or if that's just a pedantic term, because, while Legend of Dragoon, is good in a lot of ways, it is, a product of the genre that it's in. It is a JRPG. It, as we're seeing now, it has, recognizable story conventions of, evil empires and bad, dark knight overlords, who kill their own, henchmen, with reckless abandon, like Flaglubla, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. The warden is just what I'm going to go with, that we're fighting right now. He is a bad guy in pretty much in most senses of the term. And, you know, he's one of the few cliched characters of this game because they don't give him, any redeeming qualities like they will with most everyone, nearly the rest of all the villains of the game. Lloyd will have, Lloyd will be justifiable even though he does, terrible things. Lennis, has her reasoning. You the Wingleys, while definitely alien, still have their reasoning of why they do the things they do. And, it's just this one guy, which really kind of sticks out, at least in my mind, of why they did not try to humanize him, why they made him so cartoonishly evil. Um, which I honestly don't really know. He's just evil for evil's sake. So, he kind of diminishes the game overall. But, as we'll see with Lavitz, as he continues to grow and gets character development, that this game does handle things much more subtly, much more cleverly, and that's honestly, it's probably too smart for its own good. I mean, that's probably why it didn't get the credit it should have. In my opinion, this game is underrated, and it didn't get the credit it should have gotten. I mean, it came out in a time when it was kind of a saturated market. It was up against stiff competition, like I said, from Final Fantasy IX. It was a product of its time in a lot of ways, and so because of that, this kind of got the you know Spider-Man 2 coming out right after Captain America Winter Soldier treatment of its time. Of it does it does a lot of things in a good way, but at the same time it's not that transcendentness that we just had our minds blown, and so we can't have our minds blown again because our heads are still exploding from the first explosion. And so you know I'm gonna have to rewatch Spider-Man 2 again later, because I know there's a lot of things I liked about it, and it was definitely different in a lot of ways. But you know, was it as bad as I initially thought? Because Winter Soldier was so good and so transcendent. I don't know. And likewise, in a week, Days of Future Past comes out, and so is that going to be diminished? Am I going to be able to appraise that? You know, in a way that it deserves, or am I gonna have my head clouded because there were two, there was one extremely well done movie of that genre, that came out less than 2 months before it does, and one that is at least debatable as to whether it was good or not, that came out earlier that same month, and so in a crowded marketplace, like what was happening when Legend of Dragoon came out, you know, that's, kind of how I, look back on it. It kind of got buried underneath, a bigger release of its genre, which is Final Fantasy IX. It was, kind of at the end of its era, which was the end of the PS1 era. It had some things going against it, and and it's not the most accessible of games because you do have to kind of play it critically. It doesn't, like Call of Duty, just have guys yelling the story. I shouldn't talk about Call of Duty. I've not really played one of those, since the PS2 era when it was still, in its World War II phase. As far as so I can't really comment on that, but like Grand Theft Auto 3, where the story is just very simple, and and it just kind of shouts it at you, and so there's not really a lot of subtlety to even think about if you wanted to think about it. Um, it's not Street Fighter 4 where the bits of story that you do get are very simplistic, and you just breeze through. Chun-Li does this, Guile does blah. This game it does have shading and depth, and you do have to look at it, and it doesn't just immediately throw itself at you, and so because of that, oftentimes art that does that is kind of left behind, if it isn't, because there's kind of a a thinking valley of, if it's thoughtless, it can be accessed by more people, and kind of, and brought out more thoroughly, like a Transformers movie. Then you kind of get into the thinking man's valley, which would be something like the first two X-Men, or you know or Star Trek or whatnot. Or then you have kind of your more transcendent of because it's so beyond the pale of goodness. You get a Captain America Winter Soldier, you get a Citizen Kane, you get Casablanca, that moves beyond even its own medium, which I'm going to be I'm going to need to talk about genre more directly in a future video. So thanks for playing with me, thanks for listening to me ramble, and so this is John Q. Public, and looks like we're getting out of prison, so join me next time as we live our life on the lam.